Evening, everyone. So this is a workshop. We don't have to do a pledge or anything else. We're already not following our agenda. There's an item on the table that's not in the agenda. It involves food, but we're okay. If we have sugar highs, yes.
Sharing that item with the public as well?
No, because I have to bring some home to the girls. So we, right? But we can have motions to, if someone's good and tells a good story, we can say, motion to give them a piece of
I don't know if
Just give Teresa her piece now.
cheesecake brownie, right? So, all right. And who do we got online? Nick?
Yes, I was coming first, but I don't hear who.
You stay away, you lose, right? What's the equivalent of stay away and it rhymes with lose? Whatever. Yeah. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's roll call. Chris is here. Nick's online. Anyone else online?
John Clark is online.
Hey, John.
The planner.
Okay. Okay. We've got a baker's half dozen of items, and the first one is on open space planning. And are you going to introduce Ingrid, or am I?
You are. I'm just pulling it up.
Ingrid Haeckel? Haeckel. Haeckel? Haeckel. Like an E as opposed to an A. Okay. Very good.
All set for you.
And you're with Cornell, and you'll tell us everything, right?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Good evening. My name is Ingrid Haeckel, and I'm a conservation and land use specialist with the DEC's Hudson River Estuary Program, and I work through a partnership with Cornell University. So thanks for your time this evening, and thank you very much to Esther Jackson and the Conservation Advisory Council for inviting me to talk about open space inventories and plans. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of kind of where the city is at in this process and some of the work we've supported, and tell you a little bit about what open space inventories and plans are and what their benefits are. But first, just quickly, the Estuary Program is a special non-regulatory program at the DEC established to help people enjoy, protect, and revitalize the Hudson River and its valley. And we're working throughout the 10 counties along the river to ensure these key benefits. And within the Estuary Program, I'm part of a small conservation and land use team that works with municipalities and other partners to conserve important habitat and natural areas in our watershed through local land use planning and decision making. And you've probably met my colleague Laura Heedy in the past, who's worked closely with the Beacon CAC over the years, and we've had some changes on our team. She's still with us, but I'm now in charge of providing technical assistance and outreach in this area. So I've been working with the CAC. For the past 20 years that our program has been doing this work, we've been recommending this basic planning approach that starts with identifying and understanding the resources that your community has. And that provides the foundation for collecting community input and setting local priorities for conservation, and developing local plans and policies to protect and manage those resources. So a natural resources inventory is really the starting point for that process. And we've been working with many municipalities to develop inventories over the last several years, including Beacon. And an NRI is basically a compilation of information about the naturally occurring resources in the community, the geology and soils, different water resources, important wildlife habitats, land use, information about climate conditions and projections, and in some cases also information about cultural resources like historic sites, recreation assets, scenic vistas, and things of that sort. So we started working with the Beacon CAC in 2017 to develop an NRI. They were awarded this assistance through a competitive process. We partnered with Cornell Cooperative Extension to provide the mapping support, and I think it was Brian DeFeo leading the CAC who really helped pull together the components of the report and steered the project. The goals of the project were to provide an education tool for landowners and developers, and to cultivate environmental stewardship of resources in the city, to provide a unified reference for planning, designing, and reviewing new development, and a foundation for future land use policy and planning. And so the NRI was completed in 2020. It consists of 21 maps and an accompanying report that discusses all the different resources shown in the maps, why they're relevant and important, and considerations for decision making. And it integrates all of this information from different city plans and state and county sources into one really easy to access reference. So we encourage you to check that out if you haven't looked at it yet. So the NRI, as I said, is really the starting point in this planning process, and the CAC is interested in taking next steps. Now you know much more information about the city's natural resources and cultural resources, and the question is kind of what are you going to do about it? So an open space inventory, I'm going to just explain some of the different terms here. It's a little confusing sometimes. Open space inventories are essentially kind of an NRI that takes the next step and prioritizes resources. And they come from a description in general municipal law that describes how a conservation council can be designated a conservation board. If a CAC undertakes this inventory process with the community to establish local priorities and that document is accepted and approved by the legislative body, the CAC can be redesignated as a conservation board, which then plays a more formal role in reviewing development projects along with the planning board. It's still advisory, but they're referred projects for comment in that process. So then next step would be an open space plan, and that's essentially the inventory with developing local priorities for conservation, but also working out goals and strategies and actions, recommendations for what the city should do to protect and manage resources. So these things can be done in sequence. They can all be wrapped into a single project or document. There's different approaches to this process. The city has that basic starting point though, so you could move on next to an open space inventory or kind of roll that into one open space planning process and do them both together. Taking a step back, I've been saying open space a lot. What am I referring to? The Department of State has a planning guide about open space planning, and it defines it as land that is not intensively developed for residential, commercial, industrial, or institutional use. And so it can include all of these different types of resources. It's not just open land like farmland. It could be forest land, parks, vacant lots, community gardens, trails. It refers to a wide variety of types of areas, and this can be fit to an urban context or a rural context. An open space inventory, as I said, has this basis in state law, which describes an inventory of open areas within the municipality, with each area identified, described, and listed according to priority of acquisition or preservation. And once that is adopted by the city council or town board, it becomes referred to as the open space index. One of the clearest examples of an open space index is from the neighboring town of Phillipstown. And I was talking with MJ, who's presenting next, and she was actually involved in the first iteration of this project in Phillipstown. The Conservation Committee worked with, partnered with Hudson Highlands Land Trust at the time to analyze natural resources in the community and look at where these features overlapped to develop these priority areas. And so there's a very simple report with a description of each of these areas, an accompanying map showing them, and the list of parcels within each of those areas. That was done in 2009. They updated it in 2016. And when they first completed it, the Conservation Committee was redesignated as a conservation board, and MJ is actually a member of that board, so she could tell you about it sometime. An open space plan, the next step, goes beyond just priorities to outlining the justification and strategy for conserving land. And it typically includes that inventory and analysis of resources, but also a large public input process. There might be public workshops, community surveys, focus groups, interviews, really trying to solicit input from the community about their priorities for conservation and issues perhaps. And that's used to help develop a vision for open space in the community and mapping of the priorities, and then also to outline different conservation strategies, which typically include land use policy strategies. So there might be regulatory approaches to protecting open space through your zoning or other land use regulations. Acquisition, or either through purchase of properties or conservation easements, is another possible strategy. And then there's often also voluntary approaches, working with landowners to encourage stewardship, connecting them with various programs that can support that, working with community groups on projects and other things. So the plan will typically then outline recommendations for action and help provide a roadmap for how to move forward to achieve the city's goals. And this is an example of a priority open space map from the town of Pleasant Valley here in Dutchess County. So I'll just outline quickly a few examples of urban open space plans. The city of Saratoga Springs is one of the smaller cities in New York State that has a long history of open space planning. They finished their first plan in '94. They updated it in 2002, and at the same time, voters approved a $5 million bond for open space. They have since implemented many of the projects in that plan. They have spent, I think, nearly all of that bond money, and they're seeking to update that plan and renew some funding mechanisms. So they completed an NRI in 2020, and now they're in the midst of finishing an open space plan update again. And so that's one example. The city of Kingston undertook an NRI and then went right into an open space planning process. They completed this plan in 2019. They took all the data from their NRI. They looked at this, how resources overlapped in the city. They weighted certain features based on public input from workshops they held, and developed this open space vision, which has very ambitious targets for creating new trails, preserving acreage within some of these different priority areas in the city. They identified a park desert in their city that they want to try to establish a new park in. So these are all goals within the next 10 years that they're hoping to achieve. They identified funding sources and mechanisms they could use for these projects. One of those being to establish potentially a community preservation fund, which is an alternative to bond funding. And it's a real estate transfer tax. So instead of raising a bond, which affects all property tax owners, they are considering trying to put up for a referendum creation of this real estate transfer tax, which would be a one-time fee that would then go into a dedicated fund for these types of projects. And lastly, the city of Rensselaer has just gotten started on an open space planning project with funding from our program, and they're hoping to engage residents on the current and future state of natural spaces and public parks. They're combining this as both open space and recreation planning, and they also want to consider ways to green their developed areas. So we did do a little bit of starter work on this back in last year. The CAC really wanted to move forward with the open space inventory, and in the absence of grant funding, our grant program was stalled for a while due to the pandemic. We were able to support them to partner with Cooperative Extension again to undertake this survey, which had a written online component, and then there was this interactive map also where people could flag certain areas that were of particular interest and say why. And so Sean Carroll presented this last year to the city. It's on the website, the presentation, and this is a great start at soliciting public input on conservation priorities. And I think to develop the plan, you would want to do more of this, use additional methods to try to reach out broadly in the community. And this was just one result of when people were asked about their number one priority for green and open space protection. It was conservation of natural areas, followed by walking and bike trails and paths, and updating and maintaining existing open spaces. There are grant funding sources, especially our Estuary Grant Program that will fund open space inventory and planning projects. And we are hoping there'll be another RFA announced sometime next spring. In the past, the grants have been for up to $50,000, but it may be more the next time around, and we have the benefit of a pretty low match. It's only for 15% match. And we always encourage communities to look for other opportunities for partnerships and assistance as well. I'm available to provide some support too. So thanks for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have time. You can always reach out to me separately.
That last slide answered my big question, and that was to pick your brain about funding, because, you know, I think that Beacon is a unique place in that we offer the sort of great balance between affordable housing that's available and also preserving the natural environment. So I'm glad to see that you already included those. I did watch your presentation that you gave to the planning board, so it's good to have a reminder about all of these. Thank you. I don't know if this is more of a question for Nick, or if you know what land use policies in Beacon have changed since 2017. Yuri, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, been a number of zoning changes made. We added some steep slope protection by taking into account developable areas and making sure that there were certain deductions for areas that included steep slopes, so that was not calculated as a developable area. I'd have to go through and see what other, we made changes to the, use and dimensional requirements in various zoning districts. I know John Clark's on. I don't know if John has any other recollection of anything specific that might answer your question.
I thought I heard
John
it.
is coming on.
Oh, he is? Okay, good.
We made various changes to districts. The primary one for protecting green spaces is what Nick already referred to, that we deducted from the allowable area per lot for steep slopes, wetlands, floodplains, or floodways, and underwater portions of parcels. So that's the primary one. We did change certain zoning. The Fishkill Creek Development District was updated somewhere around 2017. So that was put. There was trail protections and other things in that district. So those are the primary ones I can pick up on the top of my head.
Just one more question. I thought I remembered in the planning board presentation, there was something about natural resources inventory being added to the SECRA. I'm not sure if I'm...
I shared an example of how Poughkeepsie had integrated it to their SECRA process through a local law. So it's a required conservation analysis now for projects going through SECRA to refer back to the NRI and look at potential resources that might be affected.
John, do you know if our planning board is doing the same?
No, there's no change in the law, so it's not required. I think we had a presentation on the NRI, and the planning board can use it anytime they choose to, as long as it's an official adopted policy of the city. But there's no mandatory screening or requirement at this point in the law.
Thanks.
Yeah, I look at this and I say, well, how do I fit this in? And my impression would be we would stick this in our comprehensive plan as one of the component parts, right? Because I'm looking, we have a section on environmental features, we have a section on historic resources, and that seems to be a natural fit. So, yeah, that would be interesting. The other thing too is so you're saying we can get grants for some of this, right?
Yeah, the city could apply for grant funding to do an open space inventory or plan, or both of those together.
Yeah, because what I note is that Conservation Advisory Committee, bless their souls, took on doing the NRI, the Natural Resources Inventory, and including the writing. And we kind of reached the conclusion that that was asking way too much. And I ended up doing a lot of editing personally to kind of get it there, but it was like, the next step we do, we really need some professional resource in there, because we can't ask our volunteers to do as much as they did. They actually took on chapters, and it was pretty amazing. But there was an amount of, like, you got to bring it together that kind of needed to happen. So anyway, I just note that if we do something, we need to get properly resourced.
Absolutely, I would recommend that.
Yeah, I was also thinking along the lines of how this fits with the comprehensive plan, because it is asking, we do want people to get engaged in this and want to make sure that people are engaging the full process. And I was wondering with Saratoga Springs and Kingston if you had any knowledge of how they incorporated into other citywide planning efforts that they undertook.
Yeah, Kingston adopted the open space plan into their comprehensive plan. I don't know about Saratoga Springs, but.
Is the comprehensive plan part of the secret review now, Lee?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, by integrating it into that?
Yeah, because it's the easiest way to kind of go about it. I'll read you the two environmental goals, which are the high-level goals sitting in the plan. And then underneath it, there are some recommendations or objectives. But the high-level goals is preserve environmentally significant features, create an open space system of sufficient size to reserve adequate areas for the protection of water-related resources, wildlife, landforms of particular environmental value. The rare assets of the city, such as the Hudson and Fishkill Creek, should be protected, as should the Highlands and the slopes of Mount Beacon. That's the one. And the other one is encourage high environmental standards for development and infrastructure, develop resources of renewable energy, and improve the environmental performance of city-owned property, which a number of things that we're doing. And there's objectives underneath, but I could see this very readily kind of fitting into that and kind of providing more specific detail there, right?
Yeah, the NRI could be adopted as an appendix to the comprehensive plan. That's what what Kingston has done as well. A number of communities have done that with their completed NRIs.
You described after the adoption of an OSI that the Conservation Advisory Committee could become a Conservation Advisory Board. I've read a little bit about this and heard about it. Could you describe for the public the full, what it means what that change means, please?
Sure, yeah. So a Conservation Advisory Board is still advisory in nature. They don't have a discretional role in reviewing development projects, but essentially, when the planning board receives an application, technically I think it's supposed to be one that falls within one of these priority open space areas that's been identified, but the city can determine a threshold for which projects get referred to the conservation board. Then they're given a time frame, I think 45 days, to turn around and provide comments back to the planning board regarding potential impacts to the environment, questions they have, things of that nature. So they'll provide a memo back to the planning board. Sometimes they participate in site visits as well. They may do other types of planning projects within the municipality, in addition to the other type of activities that conservation councils typically carry out.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just make one other comment. There's the other statutory area where another board might get involved on a permissive basis or a recommendation basis is on historical assets. And there's someone in our community has been telling us for a long time that we need to do a historic review board or whatever it's called under state statute. So that's sort of the other version of this that is out there for historical. We haven't tended to do that. We've left it with the planning board largely because we just don't want to be too bureaucratic, but that's certainly an option that we can look at. Cool. Any other questions, folks? We good? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yep,
if you have any other
appreciate it.
questions, just reach out to me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just so folks know, in my research on sales tax, Saratoga Springs is by far the wealthiest community around, so
I was wondering.
they do incredibly well. Oh my goodness. They do impose their own sales tax, and they win when they do it, because Saratoga Springs is so well off relative to the county and has so much of the value of property that it gives them tremendous flexibility. Anyway.
I grew up there, and I don't remember it being like that, so I'll have to go back and visit and see the change.
It's all comparative, right? If you look at the other communities upstate, right, I mean, how many of them are basically destitute, right? But anyway, so our next item, MJ, you're here, right? We have someone from the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail, MJ Martin, welcome, nice to see you again. We had talked about having you come to council and kind of talk about what you're up to. Amy, Amy, thank you for being here. And let me just turn it over to you, and you're going to talk to us a little bit about Fjord Trail.
I am.
Okay.
So again, my name is MJ Martin. I'm the Director of Development and Community Engagement at Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail. I am accompanied by Amy Casala, who is the Executive Director at HHFT. And we're going to do a little tag team to switch it up, make it interesting. And I'll kind of we have a lot of slides. I'm going to zip through them rather quickly. If you want me to go back, or you want Amy to go back at any point, we're happy to do that, but I'm cognizant of your limited time, so I don't want to linger too far on anything. All right. So I think everyone here has either seen a presentation about this project over the last 15 years that it's been contemplated, or has heard about it. But if you haven't, a need was identified several years ago about 9D, the safety of both motorists and pedestrians who were kind of in conflict at that breakneck area in particular, and just overcrowding in the parks in key areas like Breakneck Ridge. So creating some sort of a visitor management solution for that brought a lot of people together. Obviously, the 4 municipal partners in the project area, City of Beacon, Town of Fishkill, Village of Cold Spring, and the Town of Phillipstown are among that steering committee coalition of partners. Alongside, Scenic Hudson has been there right along through the whole process, Phillipstown Greenway, and then we have several state partners that have become integral to this project, along with other nonprofit partners whose mission aligns with Fjord Trail. And we have several project goals that were designated by this group that we hope to meet with the project and the plan that we've created. So we want to create, first and foremost, safe and convenient access to state park land and those resources. We want to increase accessibility through public transportation and a shuttle system. We want to protect habitat and reduce erosion, which is one of the problems of over-visitation. And then we want to spread visitation along the Hudson Highland Riverfront corridor instead of having it jam up in just a few spots. We want to benefit our local economies by having visitors come and also shop and dine in Beacon and in Cold Spring. But there's a balance to that, so we want to make sure that local residents are seeing this as a resource, and it is a resource. We're providing amenities that the communities want and the communities need. Finally, we want to, I'm getting a lot of feedback, sorry. We want to serve as a welcoming and unique recreation destination where visitors of all ages and abilities feel welcome and included. The vision is essentially this map. So it's a 7.5-mile linear park that goes along the riverfront from the City of Beacon to the Village of Cold Spring. And it primarily goes through a portion of Hudson Highlands State Park Preserve. One of the key elements to this is that we are designing with climate change in mind. The trail is being designed thoughtfully to be resilient with the effects of sea level rise on the Hudson River. So we're building that into the design. The trail is also being designed as what we're calling a trail for all. The main trail is designed as ADA accessible so that folks, whatever their abilities are, whatever their age is, they'll be able to enjoy this trail and experience, this beautiful landscape. So these are just kind of some elements of the trail. And these are we've broken it into 4 distinct landscape zones. Starting north in Beacon, there's the marsh zone, and obviously that encompasses Dennings Point. It starts in Long Dock Park, encompasses Dennings Point. Obviously some beautiful locations for wildlife, viewing at Fishkill Creek. Then there'll be the Forest Trail, which is more the Duchess Junction area as you move south, and that will go through a forest landscape to Duchess Manor, which will be our new home and a visitor center for Fjord Trail, and then past Duchess Manor to Breakneck Ridge. Oop, just skipped over that. And then the Highlands area is essentially the Breakneck Connector and Bridge, and that kind of trailhead plaza that will be created to accommodate visitation and provide much needed amenities there like restrooms. The river's edge is a 2-mile shoreline promenade that basically goes from Breakneck Ridge to Little Stony Point, and then from Little Stony Point to Dockside Park in the village of Cold Spring. Whoop. So some of the elements of the trail are trail banks. Those are places where people can stop, regroup, meet up with friends, take a rest. Those will be kind of peppered throughout the trail. We've got immersive meanders, are areas where you can depart that main trail, like Little Stony Point, where there'll be a series of other trails and experiences for people, like Breakneck Ridge, if you want to have that more rugged experience. And then we've got some signature destinations planned along the way. The lower image is of the lower overlook at Breakneck. So even if you can't do the scramble at Breakneck, you can still enjoy those great views. There's an area where kayaks can pull up and people can put their toes in the water if they want to, a little farther in the background of that image. But you can get your selfie if you really want to, and you don't have to climb up the whole mountain. The one at the top is actually in the forest section of the trail, and it's planned to be a forest canopy walk. So it will be an elevated trail, and there'll be these kind of hammocky areas where people can kind of relax in the tree canopy and experience that. And I'm going to pass this over to Amy to talk about Fjord Trail organization and what's ahead.
Okay, so Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail started as a project with this whole coalition, and a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Scenic Hudson. They have subsequently created we're a standalone nonprofit subsidiary, raising our own money and funding the capital project, and then ultimately we'll be operating and maintaining this as well. So we have a cooperative agreement with state parks to allow us to develop this on their lands or lands that they are negotiating leases with Metro North. And then we come in, build it, and then start maintaining it with staff. As MJ mentioned, we've purchased Duchess Manor a 2 years ago now, and we are in the process of working with an architect to understand what's going to happen with that facility and how it can best serve as our staff home office and also a visitor center to welcome people and be a sort of a main touchstone point for people to access this linear park. In Beacon, most of the park is actually within existing parkland, so that's easy. We spend a lot of time figuring out things in the south where the land ownership patterns are not as simple. But because we're starting in Long Dock Park, going past Dennings Point, much of it is owned by Scenic Hudson or state parks, and so there's very little land acquisition or complication. So it would really be the Clara Sauer Trail, which is currently managed by the city. So if we were to improve that, and when we improve it, then we start operating and maintaining it. So it would actually reduce the city's obligations for operations and maintenance in that area. And then we'd have to build a new bridge over Fishkill Creek that would create access and across. It's not feasible to use the Tyranda Bridge that's there. Just also note that this would create some connections to other trail projects that are currently in planning with the city's Trails Committee. So it does create a connection up the Fishkill Creek Greenway, the Beacon Trail that's going north, we call it the Hudson Trail, that goes up north and connects up over the Newburgh Beacon Bridge, and just existing trails on Dennings Point as well. So this has been in the planning. We had a 2015 master plan. We just realized changing conditions on the ground and the amount of visitation really needed a heavier management hand, which is where we are today, with an updated plan that MJ just presented that was drafted in 2020. But we're also developing some site plans along the way as we go. So the master plan is in environmental review. A draft GEIS will be released for public comment in the next couple of months, and there will be an opportunity for the city and the city residents to review that and submit any comments. Pending that, though, we've already started advancing design development for Breakneck Connector and Bridge. That's under a separate environmental review, so it is moving ahead a little bit ahead of where everything else is. As you see, it's at 80% design, and we expect construction to begin on Phase 1 Breakneck Connector and Bridge in collaboration with state parks, and that, again, that's a piece right by Breakneck Trailhead. Start with some improvements next spring, and then in earnest next late fall. But other pieces we're also designing. So construction, we've been trying to implement some little improvements as we go. One of them was the Ninham Trail addition to Breakneck. This was really a response to most of the lost and injured hiker calls were originating by people getting to the flags and saying, I can't go any further, and trying to find their way down and twisting an ankle on their way. So this trail was constructed to create an off-ramp, and we're really happy to see that there's only been 2 injured hikers on Breakneck this year since the train station reopened, and the trail stewards have been taking count. So it's the best ever. So we really think it's achieving the intended purpose. Another improvement you may have noticed if you've driven past this area on 9D is that early safety improvements. There was no fencing keeping people from the train tracks. That had some bad results. The train station was closed, and we've collaborated with Metro North and state parks and DOT to implement some early safety improvements, fencing that whole area off, which allowed the train service to resume this year. So the improvements that will move forward for Breakneck Connector are shown in this site plan, and this will include new train platforms, a trail that connects from the southbound return platform to the new relocated trailhead at the upper overlook. If I can do that. I'm always worried about advancing. We'll be having a new steward station, new facilities, and improved parking conditions. So bathrooms would be added. Well, there'll be 8 total bathrooms. This is sort of an entry plaza where Wilkinson Trail is ending. The train arrivals are coming in. There's a little bit of a scramble bank here to have people deboarding the train all at once, have a place to disperse, and head either north or south. For the trail stewards, we're relocating the trailhead from its current location, which is right by the tunnel. It's a very sort of aggressive space, up the hill a little bit, and stabilizing all of that area, which is really impacted by erosion at the very start of breakneck ascent. So this structure will be constructed for the trail stewards so that they have places to put water bottles and maps down, and just a little bit of better facility than they're currently operating with. And of course a bridge, and this will be constructed by State Parks in collaboration with us. And so this is a bridge that essentially creates that connection from where the trail is coming from the water side from the south and crossing over the tracks to about where the current breakneck trailhead is. So as I said, we'd like to start some of the upper overlook construction where the steward station is, and creating a stone staircase this spring. And then in next fall with State Parks, we'd really coordinating to have breakneck connector construction, which will be done by Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail, and the bridge, which is going to be headed by State Parks, all done. So it's a lot of construction happening in a very narrow corridor. And the construction, once begun, should last about 2 years, and then reopening. And when we reopen, what we'd like to do is have part of Duchess Manor available to open and start welcoming guests, and a shuttle service that would take people from point to point, running basically from train station to train station, Beacon and Cold Spring, and allowing that connection in between different destination spots within the trail system. That's phase one. Phase two will be heading south from there. So Shoreline Trail and Little Stony Point and beyond. And so we're at 30% design development with that, which is basically figuring out the alignment and trying to stay out of the river as much as possible. So we're in advanced conversations with Metro North and regulatory agencies on this at this point in time. And started working with the local committee for planning and design of improvements at Little Stony Point. We've been getting different input at Maple Syrup Day and other things to get more input about what people would like to see here, but so far that's included, sort of inspired by your Beacon River Pool, having some river pool, a play zone for kids, an outdoor education classroom, and improving some of the existing trails that are there right now.
And she hands the baton back to me. So we have some ongoing outreach and special studies that we're working on right now, and we have gathered a group of community members who are interested in various areas of the trail and have various interests, and we hope that we can entice more members of the community from Beacon to join in and help us in those processes. Whoops, I went backwards. So this is all about managing visitation. So one of the things that we're working on right now is a parking and shuttle study. I know we've got, I believe Chris and Lee, you're both on that, in that group or involved in that study, scoping, and will be a part of the presentation process when we get to the place where it's ready and the results are in and the analysis is in. But we're looking very carefully at parking resources, how we can expand them, but not too much, right? Because this is all about balancing visitation, and also what that shuttle system might look like and how it might run. Certainly we want to take advantage of the fact that there are 3 train stations along this corridor. So those shuttle stops would be at each of those 3 train stations, plus areas and trailheads along the way, like Little Stony Point, possibly Mount Beacon, the Notch Trailhead where those forest nets would be, and some others, obviously Duchess Manor as well. I keep going backwards. There we go. Also, in managing visitation, we are going to be increasing that parking inventory. We'll be adding 200 spots at Duchess Manor. We'll be adding about 200 spots probably at the Notch Trailhead, which is where the old Duchess Junction playground was. And then obviously just taking advantage of some of the other parking that exists and rationalizing parking at Breakneck Ridge. So one of the things that we have going on now is a first responder working group. The Duchess Junction Volunteer Fire Company is a part of that, along with Cold Spring Village volunteer fire company and some other local fire companies. They are working with us on an emergency response plan along with New York State Parks. We're trying to coordinate as best we can responses and create rational solutions to some of the burden that has fallen to volunteer fire and rescue companies. Obviously, as Amy mentioned, Ninham Trail has actually been a great benefit in terms of reducing the number of calls that our local first responders get. One of the things that we have in the future that hopefully will also make things easier for our first responders is a staging area at Breakneck for when there are accidents or incidents. And I keep doing the same thing. So this is just to show that we have been out and about. Since the summer of 2020 to present, we've had about 24 meetings with stakeholder groups, or public meetings. About a dozen of them have been public. So we really do want to get the word out. We want to have conversations. We want to hear what local residents want and need for this project to be a success. And we will continue having these meetings throughout the process. These are some of the groups that we've created. So we've got the first responder group, the parking and shuttle study group. We had a Little Stony Point citizens, a Little Stony Point design group that focused on kind of the amenities there. We are forming a sustainability group with folks who really want to talk about how we reduce emissions by getting people to take the train and using that shuttle system. We want to talk to local businesses about how we can collaborate. And we also want to add some existing working groups. We want to get some community members who are interested in DEIJ issues and how we can make this a welcoming and inclusive space for everyone. We want to talk to educators about how this can be used as an outdoor classroom. We'll have facilities, as Amy mentioned, in various locations. And then we're going to have additional webinars, Q&A sessions, surveys, and polls. So hopefully everyone will weigh in and give us their thoughts. Ways to stay informed: attend a future presentation, host a presentation or a workshop if you're a part of another group. We'd love to talk to your group. There's a lot of information on the website, hhft.org. You can subscribe to our monthly e-newsletter. We're on social media like everyone else. Or you can reach out to me directly via email. I'm happy to talk to you and answer questions. So if you've got any questions right now, thank you for your time. Amy and I are here to answer any questions.
I'm curious where Beacon fits in. I assume it is either in phase 3 or 4 or both of those, and if there's any timing or known things around that.
No, yes, it is in more of a phase 3 or 4, just because we're started in the middle with Breakneck, and then we're heading south, and then we're heading north. So it would be in that phase 3 time frame. And if I had to guess, if you don't quote me on it, I would guess starting in probably 2026, 2027. But I think that's a good point for discussion, though, is sort of what should happen in the existing park space, and maybe there are some improvements we might be able to start planning and making earlier for an outdoor classroom at sort of Madame Brett area where there's that kind of overlook of the causeway, or some improvements in activation on that Clara Sauer Trail. So that's I've moved it up and down in the time frame, but it's worth discussion, I think.
Yeah, and you might be aware we have a new owner of the former Craig House property that's currently developing that, and there has been some public discussion about should we or should we not have trails through there, which it sounds like in the current proposal wouldn't directly connect to this, but might just when we think of our overall trail system in Beacon is just good to keep in mind. So I think knowing that we have more time might be beneficial to us, but also helps us keep in mind the full impact when we design stuff that might be contained solely in Beacon, how it could be impacted by this trail system as well.
And we'd love for Beacon residents and for Beacon leadership to weigh in now on some of those issues like, education resources, and some of those trail network, how do we make those connections so that it really, really works for locals?
Yeah, and as a segue to that, I'd imagine the bridge that we have planned over the Tyranda Bridge, that would be taken into consideration rather than have two bridges possibly so close to one another, or not.
Mayor and I have discussed this. Well, it's about.
That's why you're here, is partly to talk about a couple of issues, right?
It's about, we've looked at it, there's private property interests that sort of, you can't get there from here, from when we're coming up the route from the south, right, kind of basically hugging, there's an old utility easement that goes through there, and actually a rail bed. It used to be an old rail bed, so it's nice and flat, but then you hit a couple of homes. So there's sort of always been a barrier to being able to make that connection. So the mayor has reminded me, can we still keep trying? But we've tried since I've started on this, which is 8 years ago, and it's just not ever been able to be achieved.
So I'm Dan Imar-Blair. I represent Ward 4, which includes that area, and I'd love to check in, maybe in a side conversation about the bridge plans. What's the estimated bridge timeline, your bridge construction timeline?
For the Fishkill crossing, it would be timed to the phase 3.
27,
mystery
28.
phase 3.
27, 28.
Right. I want all construction done, basically, should be done around 2029.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, anyway, I'd love to talk more about the Fishkill Creek plans and and the Craig House plans.
Great. And just FYI, I have participated on the Beacon Trails Committee for the last 8 years too, so
cool.
I'm hooked in with that.
Yeah, the last map that I saw, you can get within about 50 yards of Tyranda, maybe 70 yards. You just can't get the last way there, right? Yeah. Yeah, and again, one of the reasons we wanted you to come early is we want to be able to share that and see if we can do some things, because we have time. We have some time. Yeah, that was the one thing. The other thing that I asked you to take a look at is a connection before it gets to Beacon, or right on the border, past the Duchess Junction firehouse, and then up into Central Hudson property, up into the Highlands, right? And I hope when you get there, you'll take a look at that, because it looks like there's a clean shot. So.
Yeah, I have checked it out not on land, but in the aerial photo, so I see the corridor.
Yeah,
you're seeking.
Yep. Yeah, because
Yes.
I did a walk and I said, how do we connect this? And especially if we have a couple properties near the creek in the way, that struck me as the cleanest way to kind of get up to 9D, up into the Highlands, and obviously if you're on 9D, you can also get to Tyranda Bridge, going down South Ave.
And the other part of that equation was going towards the river from behind the Duchess Junction, which we're eyeing to be, the Duchess Junction fire rather, which we're eyeing to be maybe a good emergency responder access point to that area, because it's otherwise sort of, difficult to access. So
Yep.
we're going to evaluate that solution as well.
And then the other note I had just listening, first time I'm aware of the emergency response group. You might get better response on a weekend, because the junction has volunteers on the weekend. They kind of don't during the week. But you might want to include Beacon in that, simply because we tend to respond to their calls. Right.
It should include anyone who responds to calls to breakneck, basically. It's breakneck focused initially in the short term, and then it'll expand.
We don't do as many responses down there, but we've got a couple of fire districts, one to our south, one to our north, that we basically do the responses. They're just not able to staff the volunteers anymore. So at some point, they're going to have to face that issue. We're covering for them. And so we should probably do a little bit broader planning, because that's going to get nothing but worse in terms of, volunteers just can't do fires, that much anymore. It's a hard thing to do.
And that first responder working group we see as something that's going to be ongoing.
Yeah.
So that's not going to be kind of finite.
Yeah, this is the first year in our budget that we actually put out funds for EMT in the city budget. And we've relied on BVAC for generations, and they need some help, so. Okay.
Is there, you mentioned the Shuttle working group, and I think Lee and Chris are involved. Is there a timing for when that might start? So there might be a stop in Beacon that takes people to points south?
Yeah.
I'd like service to begin when we open Breakneck Connector Bridge and Duchess Manor, so mid-2025.
And we've got the most parking anywhere, so.
Right, yes,
Right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, directly adjacent to a working trail, so it's an easy win.
I have a sort of sideways topic to add. I appreciate all of the due diligence you've done on the sort of nuts and bolts infrastructure here and all the considerations, particularly the shuttle and all the ways that you're making the trail accessible. But I was curious if you could talk more about your partnership or the role of the Lenape Center in this project. Obviously, this trail is going through several different Native peoples' lands, including the Lenape Center, including the Stockbridge-Munsee. Beacon also is on the lands of the Wappinger and the Schaghticoke people. And I recall potentially there is discussion of a cultural easement potentially somewhere along the Fjord Trail. Maybe not, but just curious where this project is standing with conversation with Native people.
Sure. So the Lenape Center joined our steering committee in 2019, and they've been an active partner. We are coordinating with them or collaborating with them on, we're calling, well, they called it the portal, but it's sort of a memorial space, but they don't want it, the goal is that it's living and it's not thinking of the presence as a past situation, but that you're also thinking about current and future. So that's being designed by the Lenape Center and be implemented in collaboration with us at the headquarters, so in the campus of Duchess Manor. So that is, we have had one kickoff conversation to brainstorm it and cite locations for that. So we selected that, but I haven't seen any design concepts from them yet, so we're waiting. But that's an ongoing, we've brainstormed other ways to collaborate in terms of sort of maybe tribe-only scholarships or fellowship opportunities to come and study science and have some residency. All of that's sort of in this programmatic brainstorm, because we do want to, when we're up and running and increasingly scaling it as we're growing the park that we're operating, that we're offering different programs. And so what are those programs offering and how are they educating, and what exhibits do we might have at the visitor center to kind of help educate, and we'll have a whole interpretive program. And so it's sort of baby steps, but it's an active conversation.
That's great. Have you made any contact with the Stockbridge-Munsee community?
Limited, but it's an area we want to grow as well.
Great, thanks.
So last comment, and I think I said this to you the last time, you're going through an interesting process to the south in terms of the public involvement. I think you will find the community very welcoming of your involvement, and hopefully we'll be as collaborative as we both all want to be. So,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. And please, if you have any questions or any ideas, float them my way. We're open to a lot of programming ideas and your thoughts. We want to make this as best it can be for local residents and communities.
Right. And I'll say, we've also talked internally as we go to program and interpretation, people are doing things and doing them well, and we don't want to have to duplicate things. So it's really good to think about how we might hold hands with different historic societies and kind of help amplify messages in that way. So that's sort of the work to come, and any sort of ideas as we hit the ground, more outreach in the Beacon area, because as you know, we've been very southern focused lately just because of where we're doing more of the site planning. But this year we really want to start thinking about more partnership opportunities and collaborations in the city. So we welcome any suggestions.
Yeah, you'll see one other item further down our agenda on the rail trail, and I think what we've done is we went to the county and said, let's start doing our planning sooner rather than later. County's agreed, and we're going to be doing some resolutions to kind of start up some community effort for input to that. Obviously, that's incredibly important in terms of connecting to what you're all doing. So.
And I believe Chris invited me to participate
Yes.
in that committee.
Amy's been
so-
invited to the steering committee.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're
So,
forming.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
When is it beginning?
Good question.
probably next year, right?
Next year.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good answer.
It won't be 2026 or 2027. It'll be sooner than that.
Just 3.
Yeah, 2023. All right.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you both, and just for everyone to recall, important item, Amy's C is a soft C, and Kyriaku's C is a hard C, right? The K's are the same, but the C's are different.
That's right.
Right, I've been pronounced Kyriasu a number of times, and I think I called you Kakala a number of times, but I'm learning.
I've heard worse, but
I
yeah.
know.
Thanks.
But thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, we all right? Keep going?
Yep.
All right, we're going to pick up the pace. So the next item is the ever-exciting off-street parking adjacent to non-residential districts. We had that up last time. We had a question of like, what is the county talking about, all those lots? And John is going to do that, or is Nick?
Nick will kick it off, and we do have the map in your packet that shows all of the commercial areas, the border residential areas. Nick, would you, one of the things that came up last week was if a street is in between the commercial and the residential, that's not considered adjoining. Based on the map, it looks like most of that is. Could you walk us through that in addition to talking a little bit about the law?
I can, yes, and I'll be helped by John as well in terms of when we get to the map. As far as my head towards, I'll just change my screen. So this level law was the subject of a public hearing last week and previously workshopped, and recommendations received from both the city planning board and the county planning board. County planning board had offered comments that we discussed at the last public hearing and is in your packet. With respect to the across the street, that would not apply, Chris, because the law requires that the parcels have a shared parcel line for at least 20 feet. So the parcels need to be connected with a shared parcel line for at least 20 feet. That across the street parcel would not qualify in that situation. And this is a section of the code that was previously existing and was inadvertently removed. At the county map, I don't know if you want to put that up on the screen, Ben, or John, just to walk us through. But the discussion tonight is to sort of have a better understanding of the county's comments and which parcels, if any, might be able to apply this section of law that we're reinstated.
Dan, I can share my screen. I have the map up and I have some aerials that go along with it.
John, if you prefer to share, you're welcome to do that as well.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Good. So this is the map that the county did. Shows about 160 parcels that are adjacent to either industrial or commercial districts that have an adjoining property line for at least 20 feet. You can see that a lot of the purple are industrial parcels. You can see my cursor, I hope?
Yes.
Good. And then there's some along this general business district. There's a few scattered at the edges of either commercial or industrial districts. I went through aerials on all of these to see how many of them are really sort of likely to be in play at any point in the future. Obviously, for instance, this big parcels of state land are not in play at this point. The large industrial parcels in general don't need additional parking spaces. And a lot of these, almost all of the parcels stay along the Central Main Street district have houses on them. They're small lots. They wouldn't be conducive to parking lots with any great number of cars, and you would have to tear down a house in order to create a 15-car parking lot or a 20-car parking lot, so it's unlikely to do so. I did see 2 areas where, in other areas like this along behind Dia and the industrial properties on the southern waterfront, there's a great slope change between a lot of these parcels, so they wouldn't come into play. Literally, I went parcel by parcel and checked out every one of them, and these are the two that I thought where they either have been used or might be used in the future. So this area up along Fishkill Avenue, it's a general business district. You can see the parcel, the zoning district line cuts through the middle of that block. So the houses along Mead Avenue are in the residential district, the businesses along Fishkill are in the commercial district, the general business district. And there are 4 or 5 parcels along here that are either vacant or are currently being used for commercial parking. So starting at the north, there's a vacant parcel at the northern end of Mead Avenue that would be adjacent to the dollar store, or I think behind that, what used to, I think it's still a pizza parlor. So that's a parcel that could be used for commercial parking under this provision. They have a lot of parking in these places. I'm not sure they will ever need it, but that's an option. That's moving further south. There's a parcel here along Mead Avenue that's already used for commercial parking. So presumably somewhere before 2020, when this when the law was changed, these were approved as commercial lots across the property from a residential in a residential district. These 2 lots at the southern end of Mead Avenue are also used for commercial parking for these auto dealer here. There's quite a bit of grade change along this street, so it doesn't have good access to Mead. It has better access to the 52 side. And then there's a bit of general business district at the corner of Conklin here, 4 parcels, 3 parcels. One has a 2-family house. These are both commercial uses. And there's a large residential lot that's owned by this landowner. In theory, could be used for that, but again, that's up a hill, so it's not directly connectable, probably, between the parcels down below and the parcel above. But it's a possibility. So there are places where it has been used in the past and where it could be used in the future along this general business district. The other place where it could be in play is the one that sparked this whole discussion, where we discovered the mistake. This is a proposal for a new mixed-use building on this corner of Bank and West Main Street. They own this parcel, which is landlocked in the back. There's over a 20-foot connection between there, so that they have proposed putting a driveway in and putting, I believe, 15 spaces back in here that would make their parking count for whatever they want to do on the front. You can see that the property adjacent encroaches on that already, where the hardware store and the brewery is. There's an encroachment there. This landowner, this house owner here, also encroaches on the property. If you blow it up, you can see that that shed is halfway over the property line. So the owner for this corner development has already made easement deals with both the adjacent property owners so that they would be able to share this property line and have construction easements so that they could build a retaining wall here to separate the house from the commercial parking. The other place where it could happen is this parcel, which is behind the brewery and the daycare center and the hardware store. That it is all on one parcel here. It's a large parcel with a house on the front. In theory, this could be used for commercial parcel if this was ever expanded or had the type of uses that needed more parking. There are slopes in here, so it wouldn't likely be backed up against or too close to the houses on High Street. It'd be more likely to happen down in here. So those are the, if you want me to go over the map, I can go parcel by parcel and sort of as much as I remember, but there's almost none of these parcels are either vacant or large enough to be likely to be imposed upon by this parking regulation.
Questions?
I like to flip this on its head. What problem are we trying to solve for at West Main Street? What's the current process for getting, like, I understand that generally speaking, not just us, most municipalities, when in doubt, it's R140, it's residential. And so we're trying to say, okay, that was a blanket that was put into effect many decades ago. We want to be able to have the ability at some times not to have it be residential. And I guess I'm curious to know, for the owners of 16 West Main and others, what's the current process by which they can request that? I think they were going to come before City Council, but now they're trying to see if there's this other way where they don't have to. I'm trying to understand the problem we're trying to solve for by putting this back in our code.
All right. In 2019, the proposal for 16 West Main Street was put before the planning board. They can provide almost all the parking that they need on that existing corner parcel where the current auto repair shop is, but not quite. And so they own this other parcel in the back. They went to the building inspector and he said there's a provision in the code that allows you by special permit before the city council to request that be used for commercial parking. And he said, fine, let's go through the process, and once we have our state environmental quality review process completed, we'll go for the special permit to the council. That's happened, and that's been in my review letter, that you have to do this special permit for the council every month, where it was before the planning board since 2019, when the building inspector originally made that recommendation. And then they got their negative declaration. They were ready to go to the council, and the city planning board attorney, or the planning board attorney, realized that somehow disappeared in the law between 2019 and now. And so we did sort of a backtrack, and we realized that when the tables were converted, that was inadvertently left out, even though it's needed for this property, for this parcel development to go forward, and has been planned since 2019. So the two options were, you could either change or do a lot line adjustment of the zoning district and put that parcel into the linkage district, or restore the previous provision in the law that allows for this flexibility across commercial residential lines in commercial or industrial districts. And we thought it was better to recommend to restore the previous provision because it could apply to other properties just as well as this one.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, my impression is that this is the appropriate direction, not just because we were there before, but also because isn't there, if we put it back to where it was, isn't there a check in terms of it's not by right, it's subject to planning board approval, right?
Yes, and we've also, there's been, John actually, interestingly enough, just last time at the beginning of the planning board had this presentation about a special permit and how it involves extra conditions, but he was very clear at that meeting, or at least by understanding of it, that as long as the applicant meets those conditions, that they get the special permit. So a special permit isn't the right of the planning board to say no if the developer meets those conditions. Now, we could get into what those extra conditions are, we could go down that road, but I don't know if that's the best use of our time. I'll just jump through. I'm fine to pass this myself if we add the word landlocked. And it might be that we do want to make it broader for other parcels, but I hear John saying there are houses right now, but we're putting in planning that will be in effect until City Council changes it, and we don't know what the future of Beacon is. You know, there are people sitting on the council now who remember what it used to be not that long ago, 30 years ago, and so I still have some hesitation given the number of parcels that are along there. I'm looking at the back of Loopers, that wouldn't qualify for parking, so there are some other areas that down the line I have concern about, but I'm also fine to put in landlocked and and have that be okay. So that's kind of where my concern is, and I don't feel like getting into the details of special permits is the best use of our time right now.
When you're saying landlocked, we're saying not without access to a road, right?
Yes, yeah, I would, whatever the legal best definition of that is, which would affect this West Main Street parcel.
That makes
so.
common sense, too. I think it makes sense that this would be the area where we allow that. So I would support that change.
Do you want it to be landlocked or vacant? Because remember we had discussed not knocking down houses to be able to do this in the future. And one of the things I proposed to Nick during the week, I said, what if you throw in the word vacant or unimproved?
So wouldn't that rule out the one for West Main? That's undeveloped, right? Well, I guess there's half a shed on it.
Yeah, it is considered undeveloped or vacant.
Vacant, yeah. Just a thought, because if you say landlocked, you may need the access out to the road to have a secondary entrance or exit out of the parking lot.
Or
So if your goal is vacant, you know.
But that would go through, that would go through the 20-foot connection, right?
It could go through the 20-foot connection, but it also might, if you had frontage on a road, it might go out to the road as well.
Yeah, then I get, and again, this is me going off, I'm like, are we incentivizing parking over housing in our infill in our city? So I start to get into areas where, to be fair, I do not feel like I have a lot of insight. I certainly don't have as much knowledge as the planning board that recommended this and John to be able to go parcel by parcel and say what the future will hold. I'm more thinking of what policy we set right now as a council, and particularly knowing this is something that's, as John said, is that this particular case has been in motion since 2019, and they're facing a stop. And I think we as a city generally have shown that we would like to develop this area. That's why we put in the linkage district to begin with. So maybe, like I'm looking at the ones on Conklin and thinking, oh, maybe that vacant lot is a pocket park. I don't know. I don't know what those neighbors want. So I feel like the landlocked at least makes me feel comfortable to move forward, and then maybe we continue to discuss this down the line.
Yeah, I just don't see the practicality. I understand the argument, but I'm just looking at the parcels. I mean, Edgewater, someone's going to tear down the brand-new Edgewater to put in parking, or Angela Court is on there, right? No one's going to tear down Angela Court to put in parking adjacent, from an adjacent real, whatever. The only ones I just see almost nothing affecting this. I'm glad John brought up Mead and Conklin, but again, if you're doing a 50 by 100 foot lot and you've got a $300,000 home that you're going to tear down for 10, 20 parking spaces, I don't think it adds up. I don't see how it's ever going to happen.
I'd also note this provision existed up until about 2 years ago. And I don't think it was used in that manner. I don't recall how often, quite frankly, it was used. And the council retains the right in the future, should you see examples of it being used in a way which you think is detrimental, to then modify the law at that time and correcting it. And having this provision in here with the 20-foot restriction restores what was there previously and what I presume worked, because no one intentionally asked that it be modified. So sort of restores the status quo.
I'm sorry, but is there a downside to adding landlocked? I don't think I've heard or understood that.
Well, then it would only really apply to a couple parcels in the city. Whereas if you put in the vacant one, then you preclude the construction of a house, say for a parking lot. But you don't preclude it on the existing properties over on Mead, for instance, that are already used for parking, presumably under this provision years ago. They would become non-conforming goods, and special permit run with the landowner. The other thing, I don't want to get, like you say, into the details of the special permit, but there are 5 or 6, 7 special permit conditions, general ones, and which allow you or allow the planning board in this case, to say no, it negatively affects the neighboring blocks. So the location, size, use, nature, hours, and intensity of the operation involved or conducted in connection with it, the size of the site in relation to it, and the location of the site with respect to streets giving access to it, are such that it will not conflict with the appropriate and orderly development of the site and the existing permitted uses on adjacent blocks. So if there really is a problem, that this, the neighbors are all up in arms and they don't want to see this parking lot there, the planning board would have the right to say no in that case because it would negatively affect the adjacent lots. But I do think the vacant would be a reasonable addition. And that way you could put off the table of any destruction of an existing building for the purposes of creating a parking lot. In this case, on 16 West Main Street, this extra parking is going to facilitate the construction of a lot of housing, including some affordable housing.
All right, what do y'all want to do? Said I'm just good reinserting it. I mean, my impression is the zoning and the special use language was set up. Someone considered it. We just happened to pull it out. So I'm good just putting it back in where it was. But you all may have different views.
Yeah, I feel comfortable having the special use permit be the kind of deciding factor, and the planning board could take into consideration any special situations that might arise in. So I'd feel comfortable moving forward. I would include the vacant.
Other thoughts?
And Nick, if we include the word vacant, we don't need to renotice the public hearing, do we? Because we're actually narrowing it.
I would concur, because I'm not seeing the need to renotice it.
Okay.
So that's the consensus of the council. Will add that language and make sure in the next Monday's agenda pack you have that revised law.
Okay. We good? All right. Onward. Beacon Hopewell Rail Trail.
Yes.
All right.
It's a night of trails. So you're going to you have in your packet a resolution that is aimed at the County Transportation Council. The mayor and I met with the leadership of Dutchess County, including the planning department, and asked them to line up a feasibility study and conceptual planning process for next year through their UPWP. That's the Unified Planning Work Program. And it's money that they get each year through the federal government. And what we were trying to do is kickstart the planning for the Beacon to Hopewell rail trail. This used to be known as the Beacon Line. It's 13 miles long. It goes through Beacon, Town of Fishkill, Village of Fishkill, and East Fishkill. So they asked us in turn to do resolutions from all 4 municipalities, and we've already talked to the supervisor and mayors from those municipalities, and they'll be, actually Fishkill is doing theirs tonight as well. So what we hope to do is compile these, send them on to the county to show strong support for the project. We also were successful in getting this listed as a transformative project in the Duchess Moving Forward Plan, which is their 25-year long-range transportation plan. So again, this isn't an overnight project, but they did put that they would try to do a rail trail somewhere between 2025 and 2035, and this gets the ball rolling next year. We would form a local committee that would include the Fjord Trail and representatives from the 4 municipalities to support Dutchess County as they do the development of some initial plans. So you have that resolution in your packet, and we could adopt that next week. And if you have any questions, let me know.
The third whereas statement on the second page looks like it says the city. Looks like someone just
Good catch, Dan. We put that. Yeah. All right,
just to
Ben,
show
did
our
you get
strong
that?
support.
The city. We were just trying to accentuate how passionate we were about
It's only 6 cities.
this trail.
Got it.
And And how
All
strongly
right.
I believe that we are the city.
The city.
Yeah.
Yes. Amongst these 4 municipalities.
The other thought that we had in our discussion is whether they might do early planning down at the river side of the trail as opposed to the Hopewell side. Don't know, we'll have to find out, right? But obviously, we'd be excited to move sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and it's a huge project. This is a $20 to $30 million project that would take at least 2 or 3 phases. And a phase may be just getting over Route 9 in the village of Fishkill. So we're hoping that they work from west to east.
Right.
So they start in Beacon and go towards Hopewell Junction. And when they get to Hopewell Junction, it actually would intersect with the Empire State Trail, the
Right.
Duchess Rail Trail.
And which means we'll have connected Fjord Trail to the Empire State Trail, which is huge, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right.
I just want to know if there is, it sounds like this particular initial study would be paid for by federal funding.
Yes.
Is there a point that the city would need to contribute some portion of funding once construction starts or some other design element of it, just so we're kind of aware for our own capital planning and what might come up?
I don't see that right at this time. We've talked to the county about them operating it like they do their other rail trails, where they would construct, that they would do the planning, construction, and operation of and maintenance of it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in our discussions, the hardest parts, you know this better, crossing Route 9, right?
Yes.
Because you can't have a grade crossing over Route 9. That would just be nutty. But apparently, there's a tunnel under the creek that it's existing.
I don't know that.
How does the train get over? Does it go over the creek?
It goes over the creek, yeah. And so you have some narrow, this is single tracked between here and Fishkill. So there's some really narrow areas where you're probably going to have to build rail on both sides, like a safety rail. It's going to be difficult to get a decent 10 or 12 foot trail. And I think what we're thinking about here is a shared use path that's paved. It's good for biking, running, walking, ADA compliant. So I don't think there's a tunnel. We were joking about the idea of making a tunnel
okay.
under Route 9.
I wasn't listening.
Yeah.
Again.
That was knocked out along with the catapult idea that I put in. So.
But where do the tracks actually end? I mean, I know where the tracks are down by the river, but where do they actually end, the tracks?
I think they end at Hopewell, don't they? Don't they go all the way?
On this end.
On our end.
They connect at the Beacon Station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you pull out of the station on the train, there's a spur that goes slightly toward the water.
Mm-hmm.
And then it leaves a fence, enters the Clarissour Trail area.
Mm-hmm.
It has been filled in, that between the rails, someone filled it in, don't know who, but makes it much more walkable. And then it kind of goes over the tracks past the bridge over to Dennings Point. So there's a rail crossing later, then comes around the bend and goes up the creek. So it doesn't end, it goes all the way to the train station.
Got it.
Right? Because they used to run a train, when they first acquired it, they would run a train once a year, but they stopped about 15 years ago, I think. So.
And that was just a maintenance train. This hasn't had passengers since the 1920s.
Right, but the original theory was this line would connect to the Harlem line and also to the New Haven line for Metro North, so they thought it would be valuable, and that's where it started. So.
Yeah, I just asked because I'm excited by the idea of having another path for cyclists to go down to for commuters who can get down to the station quickly without having to interact with vehicles. So,
yeah, that would get
great idea.
Yep.
And Metro North is in the process of trying to abandon the line to put it under rails to trails, but they've been stuck at a there's a freight company that had old trackage rights that challenged them. So Housatonic Freight, yeah, so they've held them up at the Surface Transportation Board for about a year. But we just got a letter a couple days ago saying that they're in settlement talks. So I think this railroad was trying to get a little money for their very valuable trackage rights that they haven't used in many decades.
All good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it's a home run. Okay, you want to do the seeker finding for the highway garage solar project?
Yeah, sure. In the capital program that we passed, the 2023-2027, we put in funding, thank you. We put in funding for a solar array to be installed on the highway garage over on Camp Beacon Road. We applied for funding through Jonathan Jacobson's office that will go through the Dormitory Authority, and as part of their environmental review, they realized our building is in the Matawan State Hospital Historic District. It's eligible to be certified as a district, even though it hasn't been designated as a district. But we still then, normally putting solar panels on the roof would be a type 2 action in which you just say there's no environmental impact. Because it's in this district, it actually made it an unlisted action. So we have to do an environmental assessment form, parts 1, 2, and 3, and a negative declaration saying it won't have an adverse impact. And then once we send that, they'll process our grant. So we're hoping to implement this next spring. Again, we estimate it could be as many as 380 solar panels, but we're going to leave flexibility in the sizing because, again, we just want to cover as much of the roof as possible. And we estimate it will take on about 4.2% of the city's electricity load and take that building, basically make it net zero.
Sorry,
In
what
terms
was
of
the percentage again?
4.2
Of the city of Beacon?
total
Municipal.
Yeah,
electric.
not the government,
Municipal.
not the
Yeah.
government,
The
right?
just the government.
Just the government,
Yeah.
4.2 of the government.
Yeah. So right now, we get about 70% of our electricity from the solar farm on Dennings Point. And then this would add between 4 and 5% additional. And we're going to keep looking for these little incremental to try to get closer and closer to 100%.
That's great.
Everybody good?
Oh, and Nick reminds me that the state historic parks have said that there's no issue with it. So we have a letter from SHPO saying they don't view the project as an issue. Thank you, Nick.
All right, we ready to go to citywide speed limit reduction? And Chris, you're going to talk with Nick on this one?
Nick is going to lead on this one.
Thank you. So you may recall the state legislature adopted a law permitting municipalities to adopt a law making the speed limit 25 miles an hour within the entirety of the city or in certain areas, defined areas of the city. Previously, the citywide speed limit was 30 miles an hour. You could put specific streets only to 25 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour if you're within 1,000 feet of the school district. The law was amended to allow 25 miles an hour citywide, but required that the traffic study undertaken in connection with the analysis as to whether it's appropriate not to impose a 25 mile an hour speed limit either on a particular street, you have to do a traffic study, or if it's citywide. And so when we last spoke, I provided you a memo with explaining that process, talking about the steps a traffic study would undergo and what they would study, and some sense as to that cost. And then Chris has had further discussions with a traffic consulting engineer firm as to what those costs would be.
And I have a tickle in my throat, so I may ask you to finish this, Nick.
And I believe, Chris, that estimate was approximately $20,000.
Yes, yes.
To provide that study. And so that was something that, if you wanted to proceed, that's in the 2023 budget.
And,
So that's the process.
And then the other question that came up was about the state roads. So I spoke to New York State DOT, and the only road that they have jurisdiction over that we wouldn't be able to lower the speed limit on is Route 9D Wolcott from the city border by Van Ness down to South Avenue. And we would have to petition them to do it. They weren't clear that they would support that. But that's the only roadway that's under their jurisdiction. Everything further south on Wolcott is under our jurisdiction. All of Fishkill Avenue is under our jurisdiction.
Including all the way up 52 to the border?
Yes.
Could
So there's
we-
just that one leg of road that we would have
Could we include that leg in our study, knowing that we couldn't actually implement anything?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So
And you would petition the state to lower it.
So that's the arterial,
Yes.
the language that's used, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it coincides with the portion of the road for which we're paid a small amount for maintenance by the DOT.
And if we were to do the studies citywide, would they tell us, are we asking what streets we can do 25, or are we going to do a blanket 25 everywhere? So will they break it down?
They don't study every street. What they'll
Mhm.
do is they'll do your major corridors, and they'll basically come up with whether or not it's advisable and feasible to do 25 miles an hour citywide.
Okay.
So they might
It's
come
a
back.
higher level, like they would do your major, when I talked to him, they have some data already. I talked to Collier's Engineering, which has done studies here. So it's not like they would lay out those traffic counting strips on every little roadway.
Mm-hmm.
You look at your major routes, like for Plank 52, Wolcott, Maine, East Maine,
Where
Washington.
a change in speed would probably have the most adverse effect, potentially.
Yes,
Major.
your major corridors.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we know if any of those major corridors overlap with that potential perimeter on schools? That's the other area I'd be interested in.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so that would have to be a separate traffic study, or a street-by-street traffic study.
I mean, you have Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have areas now that are 15 miles an hour that are designated school zones. So I don't think what we're envisioning would affect what's already in place.
Right.
I'm just curious.
That's an
if-
area speed limit, and we're
Yeah.
talking about a citywide speed limit.
Yeah, I had just asked the question, whatever, last week, 2 weeks ago, if this traffic study would be able to inform any other speed limit changes that we might hypothetically want to do, and it sounds like the only other area would be around the schools, and so I'm just curious if there would be overlap with that study, with this $20,000 study, and hypothetical changes around schools.
Yeah, unknown. I'd have to get a more detailed proposal. This was kind of a back of the envelope. We think it would probably cost about $20,000.
So just one additional thought, just piggybacking on what Paloma said. When I raised this issue with the Traffic and Safety Committee last year, I proposed 25 citywide and 15 adjacent to parks and playgrounds. So that would go beyond school zones. And I think we are permitted to look at 15 miles an hour on specific streets.
I remember that.
No.
No?
The 25 is only citywide or on specific streets. The 15 is limited to school areas. I don't believe it is for playgrounds, but I can double check that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nick.
And we do have in the existing city code in section 211-6, 15 miles per hour on school speed limits. And there's a number of different roads that are listed there. Mattawan, Oak Street, School Street, South Avenue, Union Street, West Center, about 8 or 10 different streets. 211-6 of your city code.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Having said all that, $20,000 for the study for the city sounds fine with me.
So what's our next move?
Just asked to include it in the budget.
Well, we're going to present the budget on October 3rd, and I think we've tentatively put in a study line for the city council. And then, because there's a number of studies you've asked for, and again, I'm neutral to what you do as long as we don't try to do them all in 1 year. I know from doing the rec study that it's a lot of weight on the department that has to do it. So again, I think we can put something in the budget as a placeholder, and then you'll have to figure out what else do you want. I mean, if the rec study comes back and says the community wants a community center, there's a study after that, like a program of space. We talked about doing an open space plan that would be expensive. We've talked about doing a traffic study. So, again, we can put a planning item in, but it's really hard to do more than one planning study a year and do it well.
That reminds me that the open space plan has multiple funding sources, and that struck me as interesting since it's not non-regulatory. This is regulatory. Is there any funding available for this that the state makes available through transportation?
I'm not aware of it.
I don't think so.
It's a new law, so I don't.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But we've got an item in there, and then we can workshop and figure out, well, what are these all going to cost, and which one do you want to lead with? I would wait and see how your rec study comes out, and just figure out if, how much a study of that facility might be, if you want to advance that, or if you don't, we can do the open space, but I can't do them both in 1 year. It's been really hard to do this rec study. It's really hard on our rec department to keep that going while they do all the other things that they're trying to do.
You said, Chris, that you didn't want multiple studies going on with the same department at the same time?
No, multiple studies, period.
Period.
Yeah, because it's like there's a small staff here to do this, and I just can't have more than one going, or we're not going to have the time to pay attention. As I've noted, I have over $41 million in capital projects going this year and next year. I can't do 2 or 3 studies on top of that and not drop balls, and be responsive. Again, I get calls from all of you almost on a weekly basis about things that you want done, and we generally try to do them.
So we can take this up in budget.
Yeah.
Okay. We good on, setting this up? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
The item you've all been waiting for.
This is exciting.
Adjusted base proportions for homestead and non-homestead. So in English, so about 50 communities in New York State have 2 tax rates, not just the one. There's 2 exceptions. New York City has 4 rates. I think Nassau County has 3. There are about 50 communities. We're one of them that has 2 rates. And there was a law that came into play that allowed us to set up 2 rates. And the theory was that a larger portion of the tax levy was going to residential homes because they were increasing in value consistently faster than commercial properties. And so they thought it was a smart thing to limit the share that the homestead set would get. And if you did a reassessment, went to full value, you could do that. So about 45 some communities, I knew the number at one point. But it includes City Beacon, Fishkill, the Beacon City School District are 3 of them. I think Wappingers has to do it in order for the school district to do it too. So there's a few down here. So we have 2 rates. Our commercial rate, the non-homestead rate, is about 30% higher, and that reflects that desire to push a piece of the residential burden over to the commercial side. It had unintended consequences. When Main Streets went down, the tax rate kept going up because they needed to maintain a certain share of the tax bill, and it actually really harmed certain communities. Just to give you our numbers, so we set this up in '91. The split at the time was 77% to the homes and 23% to the commercial. Okay, and the objective of the statute is to kind of keep it in that range, notwithstanding new construction. So you have to do adjustments for new construction, right? The most recent one we've done splits, and remember, it's not the how much value there is. It's like, what portion of the tax bill are you going to push this way versus that way? Currently, we push 72% to homes and 28% to commercial, right? So we actually push less now than we started 30 years ago, okay? But it has to be somewhere in that realm, and there's an adjustment that has to happen based on new stuff that comes on that's residential, new stuff that comes on that's commercial, and it's a formula nobody understands except the assessors. And what's going on is our current base proportion is split 72-28, home to non-home, 72-28, and it's going to 71-29. Okay, what the heck does that mean? So by going from 72 to 71%, that means that 1% of the tax levy is going to shift over to commercial because of this, okay? And that's what the adjusted base proportions do. So in other words, if everything else was equal, homes would get a slight decrease because of this, and commercial would get a slight increase. We don't have control over how the calculation works. We just certify the adjustments, okay? That's English.
Lee, why do we have to maintain close to the numbers from 1991?
That's the law.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
It's just you sort of.
So when you establish them, you're bound to them?
Yeah, that's sort of it. And, I worked for the Spitzer administration in this area, right? I ran the agency that oversees the property tax. And we looked at all the communities, and we realized some of them really hurt because if you push the tax bill over the commercial side, hopefully it's vibrant and can, tolerate it. But what happened in a number of communities was they all went downhill, and then they get an increase in share. No, they get the same share for a lower value. And so they keep getting a higher tax rate, which is harming them. So we kind of made some proposals to allow communities to choose to change the percentage over time, right? So, would we want to adjust it at some point in the future, or to do it a little bit at a time, or to exempt a main street as opposed to an industrial district? So we were trying to kind of open up some opportunities. It didn't come about. But yeah, we're kind of stuck with it, basically. Yeah. And I've asked a couple times, do we have any wiggle room? And we kind of don't. It's all statutory.
So even though we added all that, we added commercial to Fishkill, well, you added commercial to Fishkill Creek, and then I think we increased the commercial requirement for the linkage, or whatever it's called now. So even by adding all of that commercial, our commercial has to kind of sit around 29%?
I don't know exactly. That's the part I don't really understand, because it started at 77 residential, and it's now 71. So it's come down a little bit on the residential side, and it's gone up a little on the commercial side. I'm not exactly sure how it got there, to be honest. We could ask our assessor, and then our assessor might not know either, to be honest. If we really, really wanted to know, we'd haul in a guy named John Wollum, who runs the southern region for the agency, and he will tell you the answer, and it'll be over your head. Just being honest. That's right.
Okay.
This is just one of the areas where even, I spend some time, I'm a data geek, and I've told you about as much as I know, all right? So, do you want to approve the adjusted base proportions is the question.
I have maybe a totally separate question, and you can tell me to ask this question later, but how does the city define new construction?
So, what you do is you take a parcel, because parcels tend not to change, right? If the parcel subdivides, that's different. But take a parcel, say it's empty, it has an assessment. Then you build a house on it, look at the delta of, an empty lot was worth 50 grand, now it's being assessed at 350 grand. The extra 300 is new construction, right? And so what has to happen each year to calculate new construction, which is useful not for this, well, it is useful for this too, because you have to look at new construction in both the residential and the commercial side, and then you have to make adjustments. That's why this is coming in. But you also use it to calculate the tax cap. But that's how it's done, right? So for Edgewater, for instance, right now it's still empty land, but once it gets fully constructed, they'll look at the delta, and that will be considered new construction.
As of the date of the CO, I guess?
Actually assessments
It'll
run
come in
slightly-
phased.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll probably get pushed out into pieces, right? It depends on how the assessor works it.
Okay.
Okay. But that's the general concept.
Are there, I don't know, significant renovations on some threshold that would be considered new construction for the same purposes?
Yeah, there are. Remember, there's building permits for anything that's significant, right? So the building permit kind of kicks off whether the assessor wants to do something, right? If it's like, you pull a building permit to remove an oil tank because you're going to gas, that doesn't do anything. But if you, build a 1,000 square foot addition, that's going to be probably new construction on an existing home, right? But yeah, that's how to think about it. And each year, like in this budget, I think I already know the number, our tax levy is going to be up by about 3% due to new construction. So we've had this benefit of the new units coming online and giving us kind of on the order of 2 to 3% new tax base every year without increasing anyone else's taxes, right?
And that's in excess of the cap, but we can go up to.
Right.
So
Right.
it's like 2.5% plus this 3%?
Yeah, I don't know what the cap is this year because it's related to inflation, but we'll go through it when we do the budget. But I believe the new growth percentage was just under 3%, I think.
It was 20, we added between 25 and 26 million in new growth this year.
Okay.
And then we did over 49 million last year. And then you have a bunch coming online in the next 2 years.
Which gives us tremendous flexibility to kind of improve services and without increasing existing homeowners' taxes, right? Because this is in addition to whatever's there now. And it's separate from, let's say all of the homes in Beacon go up 10% in value. That doesn't necessarily change their tax bill at all, right? Just means that the rate drops by 10%. And what affects their tax bill is new construction offsetting what we all pay, because they get a little bit of it, and then what we do in the levy, right? Whether we increase the tax bill, what percentage we do, okay? So we'll see that in the budget. This is just setting the ever-important adjusted base proportions, which are going from 72 to 71 for residential and 28 to 29 for commercial, okay?
Has it gone the other way between 1991? So it has, and you're saying that there might be a reason why municipality would want that because you want to try to do something to support your commercial businesses?
There's very little discretion in here. This is kind of done, it's a fixed calculation. So, but what it means is some years the commercial side might take a portion of the residential tax bill, which reduces any residence's tax slightly and increases the commercial side. Also note, to take away 1% from the residential side is 1/71, but 1/29, which is what you're giving to the commercial side, is actually a bigger burden, right? Because it's a smaller base, right? So you say, oh, I reduced the residential side by 1%, you might increase the commercial side by 2 or 3 in so doing, right? But we don't have control over this, right? We just observe the impact, but it's based on calculations we don't have any flexibility over. And Nick may correct me if I'm totally wrong, but I don't think I am.
That was totally correct. The only thing I would add is that when the property is assessed, it's divided into a value assigned to the land and then a separate value assigned to the building, which results in the combined assessed value.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you remind me what entity it is that decides this for us?
So our assessor does this. There is a fixed set of calculations. You'll actually see the calculations if you work your way through it. Take this number, divide by this number, and then the Office of Real Property Tax Services certifies it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they give them all to them, right? Because if you think about it, assessors may not all have the same skill sets everywhere. And so part of the role of having the state agency there is to kind of make sure they all do it more or less right. All right. I'm going to assume that was a yes.
Yes, that glazed look, yes.
I mean, maybe, I do
Would you
have.
like more cake?
I do have more questions about assessments, but not about base proportions. Just I feel like I've been doing it long enough now to understand the questions that get asked of me, and I want to ask them onward. And I think I might have said something to Chris about next year, that if the city council could get a quick update before letters go out to everybody, so we can plan for the onslaught of email. Even though we're not answering them, we get them.
Yeah, I have one I got to do that came in, but what we asked the assessor, and she agreed, that next year, at the bottom of that letter, we looked at a couple of other communities, and they give you a little bit of information. And the important piece is, your property is up by this many dollars, calculated as a percentage, and then here's the percentage for all residential in Beacon, right? So then you can kind of get a sense. So if all the homes go up 10% and your home goes up 10%, nothing's happening to your tax bill, right? But if yours goes up 15% and the average for homes is 10, that means you're going to get a higher tax bill. Okay.
So I just have a qualm in the resolution. The number doesn't match the number in the assessment. So it says in the assessment it's 70.85389, and in our resolution it says 78.85839. So the 3 and the 8 don't
transpose?
Match. Yes.
Okay, correct, thank you.
Good job. I don't have that piece of paper. I don't have the resolution in my packet, sorry. Yeah, well, let's somebody check it, all right?
We'll
let's
double
just
check that.
All right. Yeah.
Thank
Someone
you.
will make sure. Thank you. Yeah, I don't always get a full physical packet, so I could probably see it online. All right, are we ready to do, I think we have an executive session.
We have an executive session for personnel tonight.
But just to finish the thought, Dan, yes, we will, when we do letters, we're going to do a little bit more in there. We weren't able to do it this year.
It's on the calendar. I showed them.
Yeah, because they said, come on, let's do it next year, right? Because, the assessments keep rising, and so we're all scared, oh my goodness, I'm going to get a much bigger tax bill. Yeah. And the piece of information you need to know is what your increase is relative to everyone else's increase.
Yeah, I kind of figured that one out a couple of years ago as a homeowner.
Exactly.
One of the questions that I get a lot, and we don't have to tackle this right now, is when someone buys a new home, the value of that home is much higher than, say, the property next door, which is an identical home. So you have somebody who might have bought a house for $750,000, and the same exact house, room for room, next door is $500,000. And so that person wants to know, why do I pay $250,000 more than the person next door who has a house that's exactly the same as mine?
So we could ask our assessor that question, but the official answer is that you can't do that. Yeah. In other words, if there's two houses, one next to the other, and one happens to sell, say, for double what the other one is on the books for, you need to assess both the same way.
Okay.
Because if they're identical homes, like they're Angela Court townhouses, right? Just because the one sells at a lot, right? So what you should be doing is you say, either I apply that sale price to every single one of them that's identical, or I don't, and I apply a different number, and I have to have a logic as to why that is.
And I think our assessor takes an average of, the prices have risen 10% this year, and she'll do that across the board. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean just because your house went up 10%, sometimes the rates are going down 9% or 9.5%. So it doesn't mean your taxes are going up 10%.
Yeah,
but she does use averages, and she doesn't do like that kind of, somebody doubled and now we're going to hit your taxes, because we assess every year and we're at 100%. So it's not like a community where they haven't reassessed for 15 years and you just hit.
Yeah. But we do stagger the non-homestead assessments, right?
Stagger.
I thought that it was. I thought homestead was every year, and non-homestead was a third of them every 3 years, or something like that.
I'm not sure of what the assessor might do.
We can bring the
invite the
assessor.
Not, just before next.
Yeah.
The letters go out. It's not an urgent thing.
Right.
Maybe we'll do a presentation as we're getting ready to do that, and you can talk about that process.
Yeah, and there's a lot of judgment, right? One house on a block sells. All right, so we apply the sale price to everyone on the block, or is there something unique about that house that's different than the other ones? That's the judgment that has to go in. And it's never straightforward, and they're not looking at every single house. They're looking at neighborhoods, and they're looking at, at statistics, right? Because they're not doing individual assessments. So there's some wiggle room in there, and you'll get some discrepancies. So.
Okay. Thanks.
And that's also why there's an appeal process, right? So
Right.
if you have an exceptional situation, you can go talk to our assessor, who's a very reasonable human.
Yeah, and there's a time after those letters come out where there's an appeal
A committee.
day, grievance day, right? Why call it something nice when you can call it a grievance day? Comes with Festivus, but it's in May, not December. And and usually the way you do that is you say, here's my assessment, here are the ones around me, right? And so if there's become a discrepancy, you can literally go online to Dutchess County Parcel Access, look at every single property next to you, and just come saying, here's mine, here's theirs. Usually you discover you're in the ballpark, but sometimes you discover you're not, right?
And if you don't like what happens on grievance day, you can take it to the state, right?
No, you go to court, right, Nick?
Take it to court.
So in Beacon's law 199-55 sets it for a different day than most municipalities because you have a shared assessor. So by your code, it's held on the fourth Wednesday of May is the day to file your grievance filing to be heard by the Board of Assessment Review. For residential properties, if you're not satisfied with the results, you can file a SCAR proceeding, which is in court and goes through a small hearing process. And then for commercial properties, you would file a tax certiorari in Supreme Court challenging your assessment.
And what you discover is when you stay close to full value, and we're a little south of full value, but as long as you stay close, your litigation goes way down. Right.
And we have seen a number of tax grievances, and as well as those that result in tax certioraries or the SCAR, small claim assessment reviews, are minimal compared to those that are not fully assessed jurisdictions.
Right. Westchester tends not to be, and a few of the communities have gone, and you probably have seen this, Nick, where the communities that go to full value pretty quickly, their caseload goes down.
Yes.
Yep.
Not in the initial year when everyone receives a little
Right.
bit of funds, but yes.
After the first year or two. Right.
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
I don't want to drag out this too much longer,
But-
I realized earlier in the agenda I had wanted to clarify what our follow-up was on the open space planning presentation. What I heard us say is that we're interested in incorporating this into our comprehensive plan. Is that, did I understand?
I would
That would
think
be the
eventually.
NRI first.
Yeah.
That would be the NRI that we discussed. The NRI
yes.
would be looped into would be added to the comprehensive
Yes.
plan, and therefore would be informing the secret review.
But that would be a resolution, or what is the formal way to incorporate the NRI into our comprehensive plan?
Nick?
It would be a resolution,
Okay.
whereby you just add the NRI to your comprehensive plan as an appendix. And we would look to see if there's any specific language that might need to be modified. I don't think so, but that's certainly something we would review.
Okay, great. I am in favor of doing that.
And maybe can we just, Nick, when we would discuss that resolution, can we also just have a brief discussion about what it means to have the NRI included with the comprehensive plan and how it fits into SECRA and what any of it means?
Yes. Yep, we'll be prepared to do that.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, now I'm done.
Okay.
We have an executive session.
Yep. So do we need a motion to do executive session? All right. So we'll need a motion to go into executive session for personnel.
Motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel.
And then immediately come out and
And then
adjourn.
immediately come out and conduct no further public business.
All right.
Second.
So Molly and Dan, all in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
And, we never